My parents tried to erase me to keep their golden daughter happy until her husband handed me a secret letter that changed everything and their faces went pale. I'm O'Dellin. My parents told me I was difficult and quietly handed everything to my sister while smiling to my face. They thought I wouldn't notice the missing deed, the rewritten will, the sudden silence. But then, her husband knocked on my door with a letter that exposed the truth they'd buried for years. What was in that envelope shattered everything I thought I knew about loyalty, inheritance, and family. Would you open it? If you knew, it would break your heart. Asterisk asterisk. Before we dive in, what time are you watching this and where from? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your story too. It was a Friday. I hadn't planned to come home early. My last client canceled. So instead of staying late to organize receipts, I packed my bag, drove through the quiet streets of Pasadena, and pulled into our driveway just past 4. The house looked peaceful. Sunlight poured through the front windows. The scent of gardenias wafted from the porch planters. I walked in quietly, not out of stealth, but habit. After years of managing the household's appointments, bills, and the occasional outburst, you learn how to move unnoticed. I headed toward the kitchen to make a cup of tea when I caught voices coming from the sunroom. O'Dellin is too much of a burden on the family plans. Valera's voice floated through the half-closed sliding door. My hand froze mid-reach for the kettle. Mom didn't scold her. She didn't even sound surprised. Her response was soft but clear, like someone who had already made peace with the decision. We need to start transferring things while your father still has clarity. It's best we move forward before he asks questions. There was a pause. I heard the clink of a teacup being set down. Valera again. She has no kids, no husband, no reason to hold on to anything. Honestly, Mom, we're just keeping her tied into something she was never meant to have. My breath hitched. I backed up a step, gently pressing my back to the wall, heart pounding like it wanted to escape my chest. I thought maybe I misunderstood, but then Mom said it. She's single. No children. No real stake in the future of this family. It landed like glass shattering in my ears. I gripped the edge of the counter, suddenly nauseous. They kept talking, unaware I was within earshot. Valera mentioned a trust fund, something about removing my name quietly and adjusting the documentation so it would be cleaner if done before Dad's next appointment. Then came the one that sealed it. Mom's voice, gentle and cutting. We'll make it up to her in other ways. I didn't wait to hear more. I backed away, making sure my footsteps didn't creak. The kettle remained untouched. I walked straight upstairs, closed my bedroom door, and sat on the edge of my bed, staring into nothing. The walls of that room had watched me cry after Dad's heart surgery. They'd seen me stay up organizing tax forms after Valera's second divorce left her drowning in legal bills. I paid off chunks of their mortgage, quietly of course, helped them file for property tax exemptions. I even paid for Mom's chiropractor treatments when her insurance dropped her. They always said, "It means so much, O'Dellin," or "You're the rock of this family." But now, I knew. It had always been transactional. That evening, I went downstairs for dinner like nothing had happened. I moved through the kitchen, setting a few plates, ignoring the dull roar inside my chest. Valera came in, practically glowing, and began talking about her husband's latest business venture. "He's meeting with venture partners next week, might even land a development deal in Scottsdale," she chirped. Mom smiled proudly then glanced toward me. "You know, O'Dellin, it might make sense to move the rest of our investments under Valera's name for tax purposes." I nodded without meeting her eyes. "Sounds like you've got it all figured out." I picked up my plate, didn't finish my broccoli. When Valera handed me a chipped porcelain teacup, yes, the same one I used as a teenager that they never bothered to replace, I stared at it for a moment before quietly setting it aside. "I need to be up early tomorrow," I said, rising from the table. Back in my room, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I opened my laptop. I searched, "Can a trust fund beneficiary be removed without consent?" Then, "How to find out if you're still listed on a family trust?" Then, I remembered, I helped Dad draft the original trust document. It was during the refinance when I paid off the first half of their mortgage. He had me notarize a packet of forms. My name had been in the trust then. I was sure of it. So when did that change? Or had it been changing all along? Maybe I was never truly seen as part of the future, just as backup. The fill-in, the extra hand, not a daughter in full, but a convenient safety net. I shut my laptop and leaned back in my chair. My reflection in the window was blurred by the dark. Just a woman sitting alone in a house that didn't really want her, but I wasn't going to be erased that easily. I wasn't ready to confront them yet, but I wasn't going to disappear either. The sun was barely up when I opened the front door to let in the breeze. The sky still wore that soft gray color it carries before fully waking, and the street outside was silent except for a distant lawn sprinkler hissing somewhere down the block. And that's when I saw it, taped right to my doormat. A plain, unmarked envelope. No return address. Just my name printed neatly in block letters, O'Dellin. I bent down, peeled it off, and stepped inside, the front door clicking shut behind me. I stood there by the entry table, staring at it like it might explode. Then I slid a finger under the seal. Inside was a neatly folded packet, 8 pages long legal font. Across the top, proposed amendments to family trust, filing for probate review, and right underneath that, 3 names, Cynthia Norwood, Valera Norwood Briggs, and attorney Daryl K. Feldman. My name was nowhere. I flipped through the pages fast, then slower, then fast again. I knew how to read legal language. I was the one who used to explain it to them, for God's sake. What I held in my hand was a finalized filing, not a draft, not a suggestion. They had officially moved to amend the family trust, and I had been written out of it. A sound escaped my throat, somewhere between a scoff and a gasp, but nothing came out of my mouth. I just stood there. The silence of the house suddenly felt like mockery. This wasn't just a conversation overheard anymore. It was real, and it was legal. I set the papers down on the kitchen table and gripped the edge. My palms were cold, but my neck was hot. A vibration from my phone jolted me. I pulled it from my pocket. A message from Grant. "I'm sorry. I didn't know they were actually going through with it." My eyes narrowed. I didn't even realize I had texted back until I saw my own words. "What do you mean?" His reply came almost instantly. "I'll come by. This needs to be said in person." 30 minutes later, Grant was standing on my porch, his hands in the pockets of his windbreaker, eyes already apologizing. "I found the packet 2 nights ago," he said, stepping inside. I was printing out travel confirmations and saw the file open on Volra's laptop. I thought it was just her usual future planning obsession. I didn't know it was official. He paused, watching my face. "I shouldn't have looked, but when I saw your name gone, I couldn't stay quiet." We sat at the dining table. I offered him coffee, which he declined. His voice was steady, but his shoulders were tense. "I may be married to your sister," he said, "but I still know right from wrong." I studied him for a moment, unsure if this was guilt or rebellion, maybe both. "She said you were too independent," he went on. "Said you didn't need family like the rest of us did. And your mom." She just nodded like it was obvious. I couldn't bring myself to say anything yet. Grant shook his head. "You're the only one who shows up when your dad's sick, the only one who sits in the ER at 2 in the morning. Volra won't even answer her phone unless the lighting is right for FaceTime." He took a slow breath. "You know, when I first started coming around, I thought maybe it was just a misunderstanding, but then I saw it. The way they dismiss you. The way they use your name when it's convenient, but never your voice." He looked at me hard then. "It's wrong, O'Dellin, and even if I can't stop it, I can tell you the truth." I nodded once, not trusting my voice. Then he glanced at the chipped teacup sitting by the sink. The one from last night. The one that had followed me from high school to adulthood like a scar no one talked about. "They never let you replace that thing, did they?" He said quietly, said it was still perfectly fine, even when it cut your lip that time. I swallowed hard. That teacup had seemed too much. After he left, I stood alone in the quiet again. But it felt different now, like standing in a house that didn't belong to me even though I had helped build it. I walked to the closet, pulled out an old file box, and opened the folder marked Home Equity Trust 2014. There it was, the original document. My name listed as an initial contributor in black ink, notarized, $42,000. I remembered the night Dad signed it, hands still shaky from his second stent procedure. He said, "It's yours as much as ours." I flipped through until I found it. Clause 7b. Any major modification of ownership or beneficiary status requires written consent from all initial contributors. My hands were trembling, but not from fear this time, from clarity. They thought I wouldn't notice, that I'd just fade into the background like I always had. They were wrong. The morning after Grant left, I stayed in bed longer than usual. Not because I was tired, my mind had been racing all night, but because getting up meant facing what came next. By mid-morning, I was sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open, combing through a decade of digital folders labeled family documents. I hadn't touched some of these in years. Receipts, scans of wire transfers, scanned legal papers. It was like opening a time capsule filled with quiet sacrifices. Then I found it. March 28, 2012. Wire transfer, $42,000. The memo line read, "Property tax Norwood residence." 2 months after that, the original trust was drafted and signed. My name was right there under the section titled Initial Capital Contributors, and then buried deeper Clause 7b. Any changes to beneficiary distribution or ownership status shall require written consent from all initial contributors. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. This wasn't a footnote. It was a protection, one they had apparently hoped I'd forgotten or ignored, or maybe one they never thought I'd remember. The following day passed in a blur. I worked a half day at the library, nodded through conversations I didn't hear, and skipped dinner. But that next evening, just as the sky turned orange behind the Pasadena hills, I pulled my car into my parents' driveway. The house looked the same. White shutters, overgrown azaleas, the kind of place that felt like it had roots too deep to move even when you wanted to. I didn't ring the bell. I knew where he'd be. My father spent most of his evenings in the garage, a habit from retirement, one he claimed was therapy without the price tag. As I walked up the side path, I caught the faint smell of solder and WD-40. He was bent over the workbench, fiddling with the guts of an old shortwave radio. "Hey, kid," he said without looking up. I stood in the doorway for a moment, letting the air between us fill with more than the smell of dust and old wires. "I need to ask you something," I said, voice steady. That got his attention. He straightened and turned toward me, wiping his hands on an old cloth. "All right, shoot. You remember the $42,000 I wired in 2012 to help cover the property taxes when Mom's insurance appeal got denied?" He blinked. "Yeah. That was a tough year. And 2 months later," I continued, "you and Mom drafted the trust. I was listed as a contributor." He sighed. "Oh, Dallin, there's a clause," I cut in, "that any major change needs written approval from all contributors. Did you forget that?" He paused, the kind of pause that says more than words. That was your choice, he said finally. No one asked you to, but you cashed the check, I said. You let me think it meant something. He looked away, then back again. We thought you'd understand. Volera, she has a family, kids, needs. I folded my arms, swallowing the rush of heat rising in my chest. What does that make me? A sponsor? An ATM? You used my money to build this foundation, and now you're acting like I was never part of it. Don't be dramatic, he muttered, turning back toward the bench. Dramatic? I repeated. You're rewriting me out of the family finances. How's that for dramatic? He picked up a screwdriver, twisted it into the open panel like I hadn't spoken. I hated when he did that, shrinking conversations by pretending tools were louder than people. Volera's been struggling lately, he said without looking at me. I waited. What kind of struggle? I asked. No answer. Is it the divorce payments, school fees, gambling again? His hand stilled. That told me enough, but then he said something else, something that hit harder than any of that. You wouldn't want to embarrass your mother right now. I froze. What does that mean? She's not been well, he said quickly, almost too quickly, and this isn't the time to stir things up. So you're saying the solution is to quietly erase me from the trust so she doesn't have to what? Feel guilty? He turned to face me then, finally. You always take things so personally, he said exasperated. Why do you turn every problem into a crusade? That stung. Not because it was new, but because it was recycled, a phrase he'd used before. Years ago, when I questioned why Volera got an inheritance advance and I didn't, I took a breath, nodded once and turned to leave. He didn't try to stop me. As I passed through the kitchen on my way out, I saw it, the chipped teacup, sitting by the sink like it had every day since high school. The crack running from rim to base like a quiet warning no one took seriously. I wasn't allowed to replace it. It's perfectly fine, they used to say. Still works. Funny how some things never break cleanly. They just linger, damaged but present. That cup wasn't just a cup, it was me, not forgotten, just expected to endure. It was early, the kind of quiet morning where even the birds weren't quite sure it was time to start singing. I'd been up since before dawn, staring at the legal documents I had printed out and spread across my kitchen table like pieces of a broken promise. The clause was there, clear as day. My contribution to the trust gave me a right to be consulted before any changes were made. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to beg. I needed to act. By 8:15, I drafted a formal letter addressed to my parents' attorney. Calm, precise, citing the clause word for word. Any material amendment to the rights of initial contributors shall require written consent. I wrote with no bitterness in the tone, only facts. Before sealing the envelope, I looked over every sentence again. My signature came last. It wasn't just ink on paper. It was the weight of every grocery bill I'd covered, every holiday dinner I'd paid for, every emergency hospital copay I'd fronted when Dad's insurance ran out. I slid the letter into a certified mail envelope, affixed the tracking label, and stood by the front door for a moment longer than necessary. My hands trembled slightly, but I wasn't afraid, just tired. No yelling, just proof. Let them respond to paper for once. I dropped it in the mailbox on my walk that morning under a clear sky that somehow made the whole thing feel even more surreal. Pasadena looked the same, lawns trimmed, dogs being walked, neighbors waving, but for me, something had split. The silence came next. Not a phone call, not a text, not even a passive shrug from my mother. Instead, Volera found another way to speak. 3 days later, my coworker, Brina, called me during lunch. Did you see your post? What post? I asked, confused. Just check her Facebook now. And there it was, a photo. Blurry but intentional. Dad, Mom, Volera, her kids, even Grant standing stiffly at the edge. Everyone but me. The caption? Some of us sacrifice for family, while others demand what they didn't earn. Funny how the loudest ones forget what it means to give. My stomach turned. Comments began to pour in. You're the rock, Volera. Some folks don't appreciate what they have. Keep your head up, sis. Haters always show their face eventually. People I'd known since grade school were now echoing her story, swallowing it whole without a question. One mutual friend, Marcy from church choir, sent me a private message. I hope y'all work it out soon. Hate to see family tear itself apart like this. Work it out? As if this was a spat over borrowed clothes or someone forgetting a birthday dinner? I didn't reply. I didn't argue. I just took a deep breath, opened my notes app, and began capturing every comment, every share, every screenshot. They were writing the story, and I was archiving the truth. That evening, as I loaded the dishwasher after a dinner I barely tasted, I called Brina. She was the only one I trusted to see both the pain and the fight. She listened carefully, then asked, O'Dellon, did you ever sign anything waiving your rights in the trust? No, I said without hesitation, never. Brina's voice sharpened. Then the next time they go public, you will too, but on your terms. I let that sink in. Not out of vengeance, not even pride, but because truth, if left to rot in silence, starts to look like guilt. The next morning, I filed my second letter. This time with attachments, screenshots, dated, annotated. I didn't threaten. I just filed the second letter with receipts. I didn't threaten. I just filed the second letter with receipts. The next morning, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, but it tasted more like purpose than comfort. The silence in my house wasn't heavy anymore. It was focused. I opened my laptop, logged into my account, and drafted something I never thought I'd share online. Not in this lifetime at least. It wasn't an emotional rant. No dramatic tone. Just a clean, calm post, like I was explaining something at a community board meeting. I started with one sentence. Since the narrative is being shaped publicly, I owe it to myself to clarify a few things. Then I attached the PDF of the original trust agreement, highlighting the contributor clause. Below that, a redacted copy of the $42,000 wire transfer from my account in 2012, labeled Home Stabilization Payment. And finally, a picture of our house, taken from my phone the day I wrote that check. The porch steps had been rotting. The roofline sagged like a weary back. I'd spent months after that weekend bringing it back to life. Every paint stroke, every replaced panel, me. I ended with this. Family shouldn't be about what you can extract. I'm not perfect, but I was never a stranger to sacrifice. I read it once more, then hit post, and walked away. I didn't check it again for several hours. I needed space from the noise I knew would come. I folded laundry, cleaned out the fridge, and even swept the walkway, something I usually saved for weekends. But by the time I returned to my desk late that afternoon, my notifications had tripled. Some messages stung more than others. I always knew you had their backs. You just never shouted about it. Valora should be ashamed. How many times did you pay for her mess? But the ones that really struck me, they came from the people who'd quietly distanced themselves this past year. I owe you an apology. I believed what she posted last week. My mom showed me your post. She cried. Even one of Valara's closest friends, a woman named Darcy, who I hadn't spoken to in years, shared my post with a caption, "There's always two sides. I won't be dragged into lies again." That one landed hard. And Valora? Nothing. Not even a passive-aggressive quote or inspirational selfie, just silence. It screamed louder than any post. By Thursday, I had a text from a cousin I hadn't seen since Grandma's funeral. "I always knew you got a raw deal, but seeing it like that? Damn." Oh, that weekend, I attended a small neighborhood charity event at the community garden. Normally, I'd skip it, but I needed to see faces. Not for validation, just clarity. Valra was there too, of course. Airbrushed makeup, her usual curated smile, like she'd walked out of a lifestyle blog post. But something had shifted. People nodded at me first. One woman I barely knew handed me a cup of cider and whispered, "We're not blind, O'Dellin." Some of us remember who shows up. I thanked her and kept moving. At the edge of the event space, a small business owner I'd worked with during a city grant project stepped over. "If you ever need a venue," he said, "for anything, reunion, fundraiser, book club, you just call. You've earned that respect." Valra kept her distance. She didn't make eye contact. Her circle looked thinner, smaller. That night, after kicking off my shoes and placing my coat on the back of the kitchen chair, I noticed an envelope waiting by my door, hand-delivered. The family attorney's letterhead was stamped in the corner. It read, "We'd like to invite you to a clarification discussion regarding ownership contributions and trust revisions." There was no apology, no acknowledgement, just carefully chosen legal phrases, but it didn't matter. It was a response, a shift. I folded the paper and smiled to myself. They were poking the quiet one too many times, and now I was ready. The morning I filed, the Pasadena air was thick with marine fog, the kind that clings to your skin and turns every breath into a quiet weight. I parked 3 blocks from the county clerk's office, not because I had to, but because I needed the walk. I needed that moment alone, away from screens, comments, the echo of Valera's smug little barbs. I carried the folder under my arm like it was a shield. The building loomed up through the haze, bland and square, with smudged glass doors that stuck slightly when you pulled. I stepped inside, nodding to the security guard, then walked straight to the front desk. The clerk behind the glass partition looked up as I slid the envelope through. "Property dispute?" "Yes. And a challenge to a trust modification." She scanned the top page, then lifted her eyes to meet mine. "Family case?" I didn't blink. "It always is." She nodded slowly, almost like she'd seen this before. "You sure you want to go through with this?" I held her gaze. "I'm sure I'm done being erased." The woman didn't say more, just stamped the intake date and gave me a receipt. I held it in my hand for a long second, folded it into my purse, and walked out. The fog had lifted. That afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of cold tea and an old laptop I hadn't used in years. It still had the email threads from when I served as secretary on the HOA board back in 2019, right before everything started shifting. I dug through dozens of digital folders until I found what I was looking for, an email from a former board member named Thomas Claymore. His message, buried deep in a reply chain, read, "Volra submitted amendment forms, but legal flagged them. Deed changes not fully processed. Pending clarification. If not corrected, property remains as filed." I closed the laptop and sat in silence. That was the window. The next day, I tracked down Thomas through an old contact list and found him living just 10 minutes away in Altadena. I called. He picked up on the third ring. "Miss Marin?" he said, voice raspy but alert. "Yes. You may not remember me, O'Dellin. I used to handle," he interrupted. "Oh, I remember. Volra's sister." I paused. "I was hoping I could speak with you about something, about the amendment process, the trust, that filing." There was a quiet moment before he said, "Come by. I'll pull out the files." His house smelled like pine cleaner and old paper. He led me to a back den stacked with boxes and binders. He moved slowly, but with care, flipping through a set of HOA board minutes from early 2020. "Here," he said, tapping a yellow highlighted paragraph. "This is the objection I raised. Your name was still on the property records then. I told them the amendment lacked full consent. He handed me the folder. Inside were meeting transcripts, timestamps, even the original signed deed. My name, clear as daylight. You should have received notice, he added, but someone claimed you'd declined involvement. It didn't sit right with me. I stared at the paper in my lap. You knew? I did, and I should have said something sooner. He paused. It's not too late if you're ready now. I was. I thanked him, drove home, and sat at my desk well past sunset. Later that night, while drafting the motion with my real estate attorney over Zoom, I caught wind of Allur's latest attempt at control. She'd posted a vague line on Facebook. Some people would rather relive the past than heal. The comments were predictable. Her usual chorus of loyalists. I didn't engage. I didn't need to. Instead, I signed the legal motion, attached Claymore's documents, and slid the thick manila envelope into the courier box marked next day delivery. Just before midnight, I pulled up in front of Volra's townhouse. Lights were still on. Laughter filtered through the second-story window. Her and her friends maybe, or a bottle of wine trying to wash away the scent of exposure. I stepped onto her porch and slid the envelope marked urgent property dispute pending under her door. For the first time in years, she would have to respond to something she didn't control. The email came 3 days later. Subject line, community unity and property clarification, optional attendance. But I knew what it really was. Volra's invitation to the HOA meeting had all the right words. Polite, neutral, sugar-coated with phrases like neighborhood harmony and open dialogue. But even before I clicked it open, I could hear her voice behind the text, bright and performative, like a hostess at a party she wasn't planning to clean up after. I RSVP'd without hesitation. That evening, I didn't overdress. I wore navy slacks, a soft blouse, and flats, but I carried a folder tucked neatly beneath my arm. Not thick, not dramatic, just enough. The community hall buzzed when I walked in. Plastic chairs scraped against linoleum floors, neighbors adjusted their name tags, and snacks sat untouched on a folding table near the back. Volra stood near the center like she owned the place. Of course she did. She was head of the event committee. She spotted me, offered a cool little smile, and gestured toward an open seat near the front. I didn't take it. I stayed standing, close enough to see, but far enough to observe. The meeting started innocently. Parking enforcement, tree trimming on Cedar Lane. Then Volra cleared her throat and stood. Before we wrap, I'd like to acknowledge something personal, but relevant. My sister, Odellen, has recently initiated legal filings regarding property within our community. Family matters, yes, but, unfortunately, they've bled into public concern. I felt the collective breath tighten in the room. Murmurs. A few heads turned toward me. I didn't move. She believes she has a claim to a property currently occupied by my daughter and me, Volra continued, her tone soft but dripping with condescension. I've tried to handle it privately, but sometimes people insist on turning family issues into legal battles. She reached into a tote bag and pulled out a glossy brochure. Color photos, the house, the front porch with Romy holding a potted fern. The headline, Legacy, Building Our Family Future. She handed copies down both aisles like it was a church bulletin. A man in the third row whispered, "Is she serious?" Volra's eyes scanned the room, landing on me. If she wants the truth, here it is. That's when I stepped forward. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even clear my throat. I simply walked to the board table, handed the HOA president a single envelope, and said, "I have documentation to submit for the record, including unfiled deed revisions, board objections, and the original trust record bearing my name." He opened the envelope. One by one, he pulled out the documents, highlighted sections, signatures, board letters from 2019. My name in print, legal, verified, irrefutable. Then the door creaked open. Thomas Claymore entered slowly, a cane in one hand and a brown folder in the other. No one said a word. "I served on this board for 8 years, he said plainly, and I objected when Volra attempted to file changes without Odellen's consent. Those objections were ignored, but they're still in the record. And I'm here to confirm, she's not just entitled, she's rightful." Silence. The kind that fills up a room like fog. The president looked around, then down at the documents again. Given the clarity of evidence, he began slowly, and in light of Mr. Claymore's testimony, we are officially suspending any title change activity regarding this property until full review is conducted. All actions are frozen. Volra's face turned from composed to unreadable. Her lips twitched. She opened her mouth, then closed it. I didn't gloat. I didn't look away. I just nodded once, folded my hands and said, "Thank you for your time." I walked out before the applause, or the questions, could start. My pulse was calm, my breath steady. In the lobby, an older woman I'd seen trimming roses down the street reached out and gently touched my arm. "You were always the quiet one, but tonight, you looked just like your mother." I wasn't sure why it hit so deep. Maybe because my mother hadn't said a kind word to me in years. Maybe because I remembered how she used to sit at meetings like these with her back straight, her mouth closed, but her presence undeniable. I smiled. Not to prove anything, just because it felt right. I didn't need to show them everything, just enough to remind them who I was and what they threw away. I didn't rush. The next day passed in a slow, deliberate quiet, the kind that settles over you when you finally said what needed to be said. I spent the morning in the garden clipping rosemary and lavender, not because I needed them, but because the smell grounded me. I swept the porch, let the sun warm my face, ignored the vibration of my phone every 5 or 10 minutes. By late afternoon, I was ready. I sat down at the desk in my home office where the folder labeled Truth waited on the corner. It had been sitting there for weeks, thick, neat, and full of receipts no one had wanted to look at until now. I opened my laptop, logged in, created a new post on my personal page, the one Volra didn't know existed, the one with just a few co-workers, old classmates, and mutual friends who weren't quick to pick sides. Then I typed, "When your family erases you, sometimes you have to show the receipts." I attached images, scans of the original deed with my name, the trust clause highlighting initial contributor consent, board objection letters, even that old photo of the house with boarded windows from the year I covered the taxes. I added screenshots of Volra's messages, Romy's trip photos, and a breakdown of where the inheritance money had gone. No anger, no insults, just facts, stacked neatly, presented calmly. I hit post and walked away. By the time I started dinner, it had over 400 shares. I hadn't tagged anyone. No hashtags, but it spread like dry grass catching fire under a magnifying glass. People I hadn't spoken to in years commented things like, "This hits too close to home," and "Been there. Thank you for saying what we're not supposed to." By midnight, it had passed 12,000. I didn't read every comment, but the ones I did stayed with me. This is financial abuse. Her sister sounds just like mine. I wish I had proof like this. Then came the ping. Romy, a video tag. I hesitated but clicked it. Her face was blotchy, eyes red. She sniffed as she spoke. I didn't know the full story. I thought it was Mom's house to pass on. I didn't ask questions and I should have. "Please, Odellin, can we talk?" I stared at the screen. No anger, no satisfaction, just a strange stillness in my chest. I didn't reply. Instead, I turned off the lights and went to bed. The next evening, the doorbell rang just after 7. I opened the door to find Romy standing there in jeans and an oversized hoodie, makeup smudged under her eyes. "I needed to say it in person," she started. "I really didn't know about the will. I didn't know you paid for the house." I thought her voice cracked. I thought Mom was just protecting me. I looked at her, not cruelly, just clearly. "You didn't know," I said softly. "But you didn't ask either. You just took." Her mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. She nodded. There was no hug, no dramatic embrace, just a long aching pause between us. Then slowly, I closed the door gently. Not to slam it shut, but to end the moment with the same quiet it began. Later that night, I pulled out a photo from the back of a drawer. It was old, creased and faded. Me at 12, Romy at 6, our mother behind us, arms wrapped around both shoulders like a safety net that never truly held. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just breathed in and out, long and slow, as if I'd finally stepped out of something that had been pressing down on me for years. I glanced back at the laptop. My post now had over 27,000 shares. And at the top of the comment section, someone had written, "You didn't lose your family. You freed yourself from pretending they were one." I read it twice, then I clicked like. Let the world know who I really was since my family never would. The day after my post hit 30,000 shares, the house was finally quiet again. I hadn't turned on the news. I didn't scroll. I let the phone ring and buzz and flash as much as it wanted. I didn't owe anyone my attention anymore, not after what it had cost me to reclaim it. I was sipping lukewarm coffee on the back porch, watching a squirrel dart along the fence, when I heard a car pull into the driveway. The tires crunched slow and hesitant, like someone unsure whether to turn around or keep going. Then the knock. I opened the front door and there stood Darren, Romy's husband. He looked uncomfortable, like he'd been sent but hadn't agreed. "I found this," he said, holding out a thick white envelope. "In an old drawer in the garage of the farmhouse, it was tucked behind some tools. It's from your dad. It's only addressed to you." I didn't take it right away. I just stared at the handwriting. Familiar, neat, with the slight slant he always had when he was nervous. Finally, I reached out and held it in both hands. "Thanks," I said softly. Darren gave me a faint nod and turned back to his car. No apology. No explanation. But somehow it didn't feel cold. It felt overdue. Back inside, I stood at the counter and sliced it open with the side of my nail. The paper inside was worn and folded tight, creased so many times it felt like it had been opened and closed again and again before ever reaching me. It began plainly. "Odellin, if you're reading this, it means I didn't do what I should have while I was alive." He wrote about the fights I never saw, the tension I'd only sensed, how Volra had been whispering half-truths and guilt-tied debts into his ear for years. How he doubted me, not because he believed her, but because it was easier than confronting the mess he'd helped create. "You were the one who stayed, the one who fixed the fence when the post broke, the one who paid the tax when the checks bounced. I should have stood by you. The land was always meant for you because you treated it like it mattered." Inside the envelope was another folded sheet, a draft of a deed transfer, signed but not notarized. That night, I barely slept. I laid it all out on the kitchen table. The letter, the draft deed, my receipts, the HOA ruling, the notarized documentation for my lawyer's motion, my past, present, and future in legal-sized paper. By Friday morning, I was sitting in my attorney's office, folder in my lap, back straight. "This is substantial," she said after scanning the letter. "Combined with the board's freeze and the draft deed, we can initiate a title correction and formal transfer." "And it'll hold?" I asked. She looked me in the eye. "You didn't just inherit it. You reclaimed it." 2 weeks later, the documents came through. 75 acres, Officially mine. I didn't tell anyone. Instead, on a warm Sunday morning, I drove out to the edge of town past the split rail signs, and the turn where the creek still cut the land like a quiet scar. I parked near the southern fence, pulled off my shoes, and walked the line barefoot. The soil was warm, dry, familiar. I passed the pecan grove where Dad used to dig with his bare hands, muttering about root health and drainage like the trees were old friends. I stopped near the western slope and knelt down. The breeze picked up then, not sharp, just enough to rustle the grass and whisper in my ear like breath through memory. I didn't take a picture. I didn't post a thing. I just stood there. I didn't need their applause. I needed my dignity back, and I found it in a place they tried to erase me from. As I walked back toward the car, I whispered the same words that started this whole thing. Only now it wasn't anger, it was release. When your family erases you, you show the receipts, and then you start over. I didn't get the family I deserved, but I became the woman they never expected.